many other...
This is right, Arab.
Welcome back. Thanks very much for staying on with us here on WION World is One. I'm Molly Gambhir. A quick look first at the top stories making headlines around the world.
Either Afghanistan...
UK Foreign Secretary says that the central assessment was the security situation would only worsen after troop withdrawal and it was unlikely that Kabul would fall this year.
The banks are pretty much dysfunctional. Thousands line up every morning outside this prominent private bank of Afghanistan in a bid to collect cash.
WION reports from outside the banks in Kabul, where people have been queuing up in thousands to withdraw money as fears over the country's ailing economy get worse since the Taliban took over. Fresh clashes break out between the Taliban and the National Resistance Front in Afghanistan's Panjshir province after reports that 7 Taliban fighters were killed in a failed attack on Monday night. Sources indicate a technical team from Qatar has reached Kabul to assist in the operations of the airport. Russian President Vladimir Putin takes a dig at the United States, says its 20-year campaign in Afghanistan ended in only tragedies and losses.
That was the choice, the real choice, between leaving or escalating. I was not going to extend this forever war.
Amid sharp criticism over the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, President Joe Biden says it was the best available option to end both America's longest war and decades of fruitless nation building. Caldor fire raging near the popular Northern California resort community of Lake Tahoe saw a dramatic increase due to expected strong winds and poor humidity. And with that, handing it over to my colleague, Nina Maria Potts. Nina?
Well, I'm Nina Maria Potts, as you say, in Washington, D.C. Let's listen in now to a statement from British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab.
The central assessment that we were operating to, and it was certainly backed up by both the JIC and the military, is that most likely the central proposition was that given the troop withdrawal by the end of August, you would see a steady deterioration from that point, and that it was unlikely Kabul would fall this year. That was the central assessment, and of course with all the usual caveats that you will be familiar with. That doesn't mean we didn't do contingency planning or game out or test the other propositions. And just to be clear, that's something that was widely shared, that view, amongst NATO allies.
Well, for more on the British Foreign Secretary's statement, let's go across to Mandy Clark, who's joining us live from London. Mandy, did Dominic Raab admit that there had been an intelligence failure and that the UK did not expect Kabul to fall? What more can you tell us about that?
We see Dominic Raab is on the back foot. He is in Parliament taking a lot of questions. Now, you'll remember Dominic Raab was on holiday when Afghanistan fell, Kabul fell, and he was supposed to place calls. He claimed that a junior minister had done it. Then it was later discovered those messages were never passed on. So he's certainly taken a grilling from many of his MPs on exactly what happened, what Britain was willing to do, how quickly they moved, and you can see how difficult he is arguing his case that he did everything he could. He was based on the intelligence they had, but it really seems to be falling flat at the minute. And there is no let up from the MPs really wanting to know how so many people have also been left behind.
And as you say, Mandy, there are still UK nationals stuck in Afghanistan. What is the UK government's plan for evacuating them?
I think that is the key question he needs to answer. The evacuation plan has been disjointed at best. Of course, there was the evacuation flights that were happening up until Friday, but those evacuation flights halted when the UK had left Kabul. Now, there has been suggestions that many of the UK nationals stuck take land borders, but many of those are not considered to be safe passage. So there's many people inside Afghanistan reaching out to the BBC, reaching out to other news organizations, asking for help because they're simply not getting it from the government. And that will be the key question that Dominic Raab will have to answer. They have been conversations with the Taliban trying to get assurances that they will allow those eligible to be evacuated to the UK safe passage. So far, the Taliban has said they'd be willing to consider it. But really, there hasn't been a very clear evacuation plan. And we're seeing that from the people on the ground.
And that was Mandy Clark reporting live for us in London. In defense of his administration's frantic departure from Afghanistan, US President Joe Biden has declared the war a success, calling it a wise decision despite facing tough questions about the emergency exit. Joe Biden is the fourth US president and the sitting commander-in-chief for the war against the Taliban, which has now ended after 20 years. Biden defended his decision to leave Afghanistan as the best decision for America. Listen in.
My fellow Americans, the war in Afghanistan is now over. I'm the fourth president who has faced the issue of whether and when to end this war. When I was running for president, I made a commitment to the American people that I would end this war. And today, I've honored that commitment. It was time to be honest with the American people again. That was the choice, the real choice, between leaving or escalating. I was not going to extend this forever war, and I was not extending a forever exit. The decision to end the military airlift operations at Kabul airport was based on the unanimous recommendation of my civilian and military advisors.
Joe Biden has also called the evacuation from Kabul an extraordinary success. This follows 2 weeks of evacuation flights, which helped evacuate over 120,000 US citizens, foreigners and Afghans after the Taliban regained control of the country.
90% of Americans in Afghanistan who wanted to leave were able to leave. And for those remaining Americans, there is no deadline. We remain committed to get them out if they want to come out. And the foreign policy that has guided our nation the last 2 decades, we've got to learn from our mistakes. To me, there are 2 that are paramount. First, we must set missions with clear, achievable goals, not ones we'll never reach. And second, We must stay clearly focused on the fundamental national security interest of the United States of America.
And addressing another rising concern, Biden has warned ISIS-K that they will be hunted down. The hardline Islamist group in Afghanistan killed 13 U.S. military members in a suicide blast this month.
And to ISIS-K, we are not done with you yet. As Commander-in-Chief, I firmly believe the best path to guard our safety and our security lies in a tough, unforgiving, targeted, precise strategy that goes after terror where it is today, not where it was 2 decades ago. That's what's in our national interest.
For weeks now, US President Joe Biden has been defiant and has been defending his decision over the Afghanistan withdrawal. However, the criticism is only mounting. Speaking to teenagers at an educational facility in Vladivostok, Russian President Vladimir Putin slammed Joe Biden for the American troops' withdrawal and heavily criticized America's war in Afghanistan. Putin said that the U.S. military intervention in Afghanistan had achieved nothing but tragedy and loss of life on all sides. He also added that the U.S. approach in Afghanistan has been deeply flawed.
20 лет. Американские войска.
For 20 years, the American forces were present on this territory. And for 20 years, they tried, as we can say without offense to anyone, to civilize the people who live there, to instill their own norms and standards of life in the widest possible sense of this word, including when it comes to the political organization of society. The result is only tragedies.
В широком смысле этого слова, в том числе и политической организации общества.
Russia has raised concerns over a potential spillover of instability into Central Asia and possible infiltration of extremists into the wider region, including Russia and the spread of radical Islamism. Russian state media has cast the US withdrawal as a catastrophic geopolitical failure. The gloating's been tempered by the fact that the Soviet Union was also forced to withdraw its forces from Afghanistan in 1989 after almost 10 years of fighting. Earlier in July, when the Taliban made territorial gains in the north in Afghanistan, Moscow had reinforced its military base in Tajikistan, which neighbours Afghanistan. Russian forces are also holding a month of exercises near the border. Banks in Kabul are drawing huge crowds, with cash-trapped Afghans waiting for hours to withdraw money. Our correspondent Anas Malik made a trip to the banks in Kabul, bringing us this report from Ground Zero.
Long queues, hundreds on the streets, a limit on cash withdrawal, and hours of waiting. Massive crowds are gathering outside banks as locals in Kabul rush to withdraw money. The biggest complaints are the new restrictions on cash withdrawal. Earlier, the Taliban had ordered banks to reopen, but imposed a limit on withdrawals of 20,000 Afghani. This is around $230. In a cash-based society like Afghanistan, the closure of banks was a dual blow, living without paper money for days, and the downfall of yet another regime had people fearing for their future in the country.
We call on the Islamic Emirate to build the Afghan economy as soon as possible, so that the Afghans can come and start working again.
Our correspondent took to the streets of Kabul to see what the situation was like in the Afghan capital. Wherever he turned, there were long queues outside banks, with people desperate to get their money out.
17 days of the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, the banks are pretty much dysfunctional. Thousands line up every morning outside this prominent private bank of Afghanistan in a bid to collect cash. They complain that for the week, they're only allowed to take about $200 or 20,000 Afghanis out. Hundreds and hundreds of people have been waiting in order to get money to run their daily affairs.
Afghanistan's banks are critical to the country's recovery, but they are now facing an uncertain future. There are doubts over everything, from liquidity to employment of female staff. For many here, the banks are the new airport. The stress of not knowing how long the money will last, as well as the long queues, have left Afghans spending days and nights outside the banks. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Firefighters are struggling to contain the blazes ravaging the U.S. state of California, and now a new wildfire has broken out in the state's Lake Tahoe region. Authorities have evacuated tourists and residents from the area as the wildfire continues to spread. A massive force is working to douse the flames near Lake Tahoe. Firefighting activities are massively hampered by adverse weather conditions. Dry fuel and upslope canyon winds have aided in spreading the fire. The fire has spread across 177,000 acres. Firemen have been able to contain only 14% of the blaze. About 22,000 people have been evacuated so far. The Calder fire has damaged over 472 structures, including residential, commercial, and other buildings. The NWS has forecast critical fire weather conditions for the upcoming days. The threat is such that authorities have closed all national forests in California until September the 17th. The fires have spread from one end of Sierra Nevada to the other, only for the second time in history.
As fuel is burning, these hot embers are casting off of trees and timber and vegetation, and the wind takes those hot ignitable embers and gases along with the hot smoke, drives it ahead of the fire, and then they're landing and easily igniting vegetation ahead. So the distances that it can ignite are half a mile to 3/4 miles, what we've been experiencing.
California's governor has said that the administration will do all it can to help the residents. He's promised to deploy more force to tame the blaze. Over 15,000 personnel are on the ground battling the inferno.
But the fire that's generating most consternation right now, a lot of stress, understandably so, and is now precipitated in evacuations, mandatory evacuations in the South Lake Tahoe area, is the Calder fire. I've been up a number of occasions, be back there tomorrow. We continue to battle that fire, about 192,000 acres, 16% contained.
The inferno has now spread to the neighboring state of Nevada. Officials said they're preparing for the worst. As the inferno spreads towards communities near the state border, the Calder fire crossed 2 major highways and burned mountain cabins. It has swept down slopes into the Tahoe Basin.
We've been coordinating with the Governor's Office of Energy and the Department of Agriculture in the fuel monitoring in the area to make sure there's plenty of fuel for the evacuees as they come into our area. The Department of Agriculture is also monitoring the grocery stores and the food on the shelves to make sure as people enter the areas we have enough resources.
The U.S. has seen one of its worst wildfire seasons in history. The fires have been triggered mainly by climate change. The inferno has resulted in drought in the region, environmentalists saying that such fires will be more frequent in the future. Staying with the U.S., schools in Texas have been closed after 2 teachers died of the coronavirus. The deaths have raised concerns over the reopening of schools and a rise in COVID cases. Both the teachers taught secondary school students who are not yet vaccinated. The schools have been closed for at least a week. It's yet to be confirmed if the teachers were inoculated.
Sure that we start as far as with the sanitizing on the campus as far as throughout this week, and then hopefully being able to identify even some of the cases who may be asymptomatic.
However, the state of Texas has one of the highest vaccine hesitancy rates in the US. According to a report, COVID cases among school students have tripled in a week. It added that over 20,000 students have tested positive since schools reopened more than 2 weeks ago.
We call that kind of a complex or a compound trauma because they haven't really had an opportunity to get through or deal with or accept what has happened in one situation, and then something really bad happens right after that.
New Zealanders are out on beaches and are queuing up for takeaway food as tough lockdown measures designed to break an outbreak of the Delta variant were eased for most of the country. Auckland, New Zealand's largest city, still remains under lockdown. 1.7 million people in Auckland will remain under lockdown for 2 more weeks. Schools and offices across New Zealand remain shut, and businesses can provide only contactless services.
Police set up checkpoints across the city of Auckland to prevent non-essential travel as New Zealand recorded 75 new cases of COVID-19 on Wednesday. That's a bounce in infections following 2 days of seeing case numbers decline. All but one of the new infections were detected in Auckland. The Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, said people shouldn't be alarmed.
Now, this latest bounce in numbers is not unexpected. We did see this last April, the smoothing of the average over the last 3 days. It is clear that, on average, the daily case numbers are lower than the peak in the early 80s. But, of course, we will be watching carefully.
New Zealand was largely coronavirus-free until the outbreak of the Delta variant prompted Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern to order a snap nationwide lockdown on August the 17th. The country is now racing to vaccinate its population, with the government under pressure to catch up with other nations. Just over a quarter of the population has been fully vaccinated so far. Meanwhile, around 1.7 million people in Auckland still remain in strict level 4 lockdown for another 2 weeks. Restrictions for the rest of the country were loosened on Wednesday. It meant that outside of Auckland, New Zealanders could visit beaches, queue for takeaways and play golf. However, businesses can only provide contactless services, while schools and offices remain shut nationwide.
In a latest filing in court, Britney Spears' legal team has said that her father, Jamie Spears, should step down immediately and without conditions from his role as a conservator of her estate. The pop star's lawyer, Matthew Rosengart, has accused Jamie Spears of extortion in the legal battle to end Britney's conservatorship. Jamie Spears allegedly demanded a payment of $2 million in fees to his attorneys and for experts handling the media. The court will hear the matter on September 29th.
Britney Spears' lawyer has accused the singer's father of extortion in the legal battle over his conservatorship of her estate. That's according to new court documents filed on Tuesday, which state that Spears' father, Jamie, reportedly asked for some $2 million in payments in exchange for his removal as her conservator. Matthew Rosengart, Spears' lawyer, called the attempt a non-starter, adding, quote, "Mr. Spears is obligated to step down without condition and without seeking to extract anything further from his daughter. Indeed, Mr. Spears should resign now, and if he does not, this court must suspend him on September 29th. Earlier this month, Spears' father conceded for the first time he would relinquish control over his daughter's $60 million estate because he did not believe a public battle would be in her best interest. But he gave no date for his departure and said he first wanted to get the latest bills for his attorney's work approved by the court. Under conservatorship rules, Britney pays for all costs incurred by her and others. Lawyers for Jamie Spears did not immediately respond to requests for comment on the latest filing. He has repeatedly said that he has acted only in his daughter's interests to rebuild her finances and protect her from people trying to exploit her. The next court hearing in the contentious case is set for September 29th.
And with that, it's a wrap on today's WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. For all the latest news and updates, stay tuned to WION. World is one.
This is right, Arab.